I'm completely obsessed with the show Sex Education and what it does for representation of queer individuals. I made a whole PowerPoint presentation and I wrote an essay about this in college because it does a really good job about educating everyone on all of the different identities that exist in relation to sexuality and gender. And they did it in a fun way that wasn't like you're just sitting down learning something in a classroom. It's told through the perspective of multiple characters, and it revolves around this idea of a sex clinic run by high school students. One of the people whose parents, his mother was a sex therapist. And the whole message of this was just working to get these students to accept themselves and be more comfortable with their bodies and concepts of sex and gender and sexuality. And it examines many diverse relationships in terms of race and sexuality and how they overcome issues that they face. And it also has these amazing coming of age plots, and you can see these characters evolve and become more mature and more in tune with who they are. And I thought this show did a really good job being an example of queer theory, which I made another video about, but for anyone who doesn't know, it's just essentially doing away with labels and social norms and argues that things are too narrow and these social norms can never truly encompass every individual, and everyone is a spectrum. It's not black and white. And sex education breaks many of these stereotypes that people see about marginalized groups in the media. And it also gives a very large amount of representation of queer individuals as well as race. And no character is shallowly explained. It means that everyone has a deep background that shows why they are the way they are and why they do what they do. And it includes a very amazing feminist analysis, as one of the characters is this educated feminist literature geek. And they even included characters with disabilities like anxiety or self-harm or being wheelchair bound due to other medical issues. And it shows queer characters without following the Hays Code, which was like a moral content guide that essentially made it so media in the US could not show queer individuals unless it ended up in them dead or miserable. So it showed all of these stories about all these different identities, but it did it in a happy way, and there was no notes of Hays there. And it broke a lot of stereotypes. One being like the mother who was a sex therapist only was interested in sex and did not want relationships. And this is kind of the opposite of what we would normally see, where it's typically men that fall into those categories. And it showed multiple openly black and brown and queer men and did it in a positive way where they sort of knew who they were and they were proud of their identity, and they knew that, sometimes people will use that to discriminate against them, but they weren't going to let that impact them. And it showed stories of SA and how people moved past that and sort of got justice for themselves and for other women or people that have been assaulted. And it educated about a lot of different identities, including, non-binary, asexual, just the typical gay and lesbian, bisexual. And it didn't just introduce these concepts, it actually described in an educational way more about the identities and more about different ways to support these identities and to support yourself if you are someone who fits into those categories. And one example of this is someone who was talking to the sex education teacher and told this woman that she didn't really feel anything at all when thinking about sex and didn't really want it. And her response was Do you know what asexuality is? It's when some people have no sexual attraction to any sex or gender, and sex just doesn't do it for some people. And later, this girl told the teacher that she still wanted to have relationships with people. And she then explained, well, some asexual people still want romantic relationships, but they don't want the sex bit. And others don't want either. And sexuality is fluid, sex doesn't make us whole. And so, how could you ever be broken? And there were also multiple characters who were transgender, and it sort of showed a unique perspective and gave a lot of lessons on the trans experience and sort of humanized people that are typically vilified in the media. And there are so many amazing things about this show. I urge everyone to watch it. It's also like funny and entertaining and just a good time all around. But I also just wanted to raise up some points about other shows and media that is queer, or shows queer characters, because I feel like I've had a lot of issues trying to find a list. And yeah, I just wanted more people to be able to know of these shows and movies so they can enjoy them. I've already talked about The Haunting of Bly Manor and its accompanying shows, The Haunting of Hill House and Midnight Mass, and they all show queer characters, The Haunting of Bly Manor especially so. And then there's other shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where Willow is a queer, bisexual woman. There's also the movie that came out recently called I Saw the TV Glow. And although it didn't necessarily directly talk about transgender individuals or anyone queer, it alluded to it and made a lot of cool references that sort of put the perspective of being trans into something that's not even related to sexuality or gender. And I just thought it was an amazing movie. And I love Killing Eve. Just iconic. Villanelle and Eve and their little relationship there. And then there's Moonlight, which is a movie about a black queer man. And there's The Perks of Being a Wallflower and Bohemian Rhapsody, which talks about like Freddie Mercury from Queen. And then there's the Elton John movie called Rocket Man, and Love, Simon and Love, Victor. Nimona is like a Disney movie that also sort of alludes to it being a metaphor about transgender individuals and queer relationships. Then there's But I'm a Cheerleader, which is like, it's a funny movie, but it's also sort of like a conversion therapy camp. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once also has queer characters. And then Disclosure and Bottoms, which is like a lesbian fight club movie. And The Color Purple and Orange is the New Black, which has Laverne Cox. And she is a trans actress, and I love her. There's also Glee, The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and Pretty Little Liars, The L Word, Modern Family, and The Owl House. Obviously, RuPaul Drag Race, Heartstopper, The Handmaid's Tale, Grey's Anatomy, and Queer Eye. And I would love if anyone has other recommendations. I would love to get more. There's probably a ton more that I just haven't added to the list. But I always think it's amazing to watch more about queer representation and do it in a positive light.